Good evening, and welcome to television.
Now, this is a story all about how my cam got flipped turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I got my engine to pump some good air. In Bakersfield College, it can be a maze, and auto tag is where I spend most of my day. Honing out, flexing, and measuring with the ruler and all kinds of machining with all kinds of tools when a couple of numbers didn't make spec. It caused my brain to stop and think, what the heck? I said the clearance is a little tight, and Posey got scared and said, you better check your cam lobes and how they pump air. I whistled for Byron to bring a tool here. He brought a dial caliper and a micrometer. If anything, I could say, let's go take a look, but I thought, nah, forget it, let's go check the book. I turned to chapter 19, it was getting kind of late, and I said to my friends, go home, smell you later. Looked at the info and I learned it from there, how cylinders get a fresh rinse of pumped air.
And now for something completely different.
At its base, an engine is essentially an air pump, but the camshaft is the determining factor in how efficiently the engine pumps air at different speeds. The size and shape of the valve ports and runners play a role in the flow of air, but the camshaft profile is a crucial factor in determining how many lucky air molecules make it into club cylinder. From a performance standpoint, the overall objective is to make sure club cylinder is as full as it can be. When a performance camshaft is installed, other breathing parts are often required, such as intake and exhaust systems, new fuel injectors, or a better carburetor, as well as altered computer mapping, all of which needs to be matched. The cam designer can fine-tune an engine's performance by changing the points of when the valves open and close. These are called events. The intake valve needs to be open prior to TDC before the piston begins moving down on its intake stroke. If the intake valve was closed at TDC, the piston would suck against the unopened valve port, creating vacuum resistance, robbing power. This would be especially noticeable at higher speeds. So, back to the intake valve. Remember, we gotta keep club cylinder bumping, so the doors are gonna open early and close late. The valve remains open long after bottom dead center, even into the compression stroke. Keeping the intake valve open takes advantage of the velocity of the incoming gases, which continue to fill the cylinder even though the piston is already moving back up again on its compression stroke. The point in which the intake valve closes is a very important factor in determining how the engine operates. It controls the RPM of the engine. Closing it later allows more air and fuel into the cylinder, which means higher RPM. It also governs the effective compression ratio of the engine. Closing it later lowers the effective compression ratio. Swept volume is a term that describes the cylinder volume that the piston sweeps through during one stroke. It is 0.7854 times the bore diameter squared times the stroke. Static compression ratio is measured by how much air is compressed from bottom dead center to top dead center. Effective compression ratio is measured by how much air is compressed after bottom dead center between when the intake valve closes and top dead center. As an engine runs, the static compression ratio becomes secondary to effective compression because compression cannot occur unless the intake valve is closed. Therefore, closing the intake valve later lowers the effective compression ratio, not the static ratio. This complicates the cam designer's job because leaving the intake valve open longer is a proven way to bring more air into the cylinder at high RPM. Effective compression is considerably lower than static compression. When the throttle is partially open, the engine needs more compression to run efficiently. A higher static compression ratio, therefore, will help part throttle operation, as will variable valve timing to close the intake valve sooner. In 1876, when Nicholas Otto patented the first compression charge 4-stroke engine, all of the engine parts got together and took a vote as to who is in control of cam timing events. And because the crankshaft rotates twice as much as the camshaft, the crankshaft won, majority rules. So because of that, all cam timing events are listed in crankshaft degrees, not camshaft degrees. True story, no lie. The piston starts and stops at the beginning of each stroke. During the intake stroke, the connecting rod spins, whipping the piston down into the bore like a major league pitcher throwing a fastball, hand over elbow at a 90-degree angle. At higher speeds, the piston accelerates very quickly, causing a big gulp of air when it reaches maximum velocity at 90 degrees of rod angle. When you think of max piston velocity, just remember it's the rod angle that's at 90 degrees, not the crankshaft. Remember, hand over elbow. Piston velocity governs engine speed. A shorter stroke engine can achieve higher RPM than a longer stroke engine. F1 race cars can get over 15,000 RPM with a very short stroke, compared to large diesel engines on ships, which run upwards of 2,200 RPM. The exhaust valve must be open well before the end of the power stroke. Blowdown is a term describing the part of the power stroke between when the exhaust valve opens and the piston reaching bottom dead center. The pressure of expanding gases in the cylinder must be bled off during the blowdown period before the piston changes direction and moves up on the exhaust stroke. Most of the power of the burning gases has been delivered to the piston by about halfway through the power stroke, so opening the exhaust valve at this point doesn't harm power output. The exhaust valve should be nearly wide open by the time the piston reaches maximum velocity. This minimizes resistance to flow caused by exhaust gas pressure, which would otherwise result in a pumping loss. Pumping losses describe the work needed to move air in and out of the cylinder. Another pumping loss occurs when the throttle plate impedes the flow of air into the cylinder. If the blowdown period begins too late, the resulting high pressure during the exhaust stroke can cause intake reversion at lower speeds. The EGR was very unpopular when it was introduced in the 70s, but the EGR actually increases engine efficiency. Since the 90s, computer-controlled engine measurement systems have used the EGR valve to add inert exhaust gas to the air-fuel charge. Because the air-fuel charge does not contain as much energy, the driver must open the throttle further to maintain the desired power. Many late-model engines with variable valve timing do not require an EGR valve because repositioning the cam lobe provides the same result. The timing of the closing of the exhaust valve is important for maintaining high intake vacuum. When the piston has reached the top of the exhaust stroke, the cam lobe holds the exhaust valve open past top dead center. At higher speeds, the inertia of the exhaust gas leaving results in low pressure behind it. This vacuum condition sucks more exhaust from the cylinder, called scavenging, and helps intake during valve overlap, increasing power. The inertia of the intake helps fill the cylinder more. There is a time between the exhaust stroke and the intake stroke where both valves are open at the same time. It's valve overlap. Stock engines have valve overlap of 15 to 30 crankshaft degrees. Additional overlap provides more efficient cylinder filling at high RPM, but causes lower engine vacuum and worsened low-end performance, idle quality, and low-speed fuel economy. On the bright side though, it can give one heck of an old-school hot rod thump. And oddly enough, increasing the EGR valve to 90% can give you the same thump, so long as your engine doesn't die first. Overlap is what gives these engines their distinctive lope at idle, but low intake manifold vacuum associated with this lope can lead to problems such as inconsistent vacuum power brake performance. This is why auxiliary vacuum reservoirs are sometimes needed. Unlike an increase in duration, which keeps valves open longer, valve lift does not cause a rough idle or ruin low-end performance. High valve overlap can lead to clearance problems between valves and pistons because both valves are partly open when the piston is at the top of the cylinder. However, excessive valve lift does not cause piston-to-valve interference because the piston is down in the cylinder when the valve is open to maximum lift. In order to check your camshaft's timing, you first must locate top dead center. There are many different ways you can do this, including using a dial indicator or modifying a spark plug into what's known as a stop bolt. All of this information, techniques, and how to do it is in your book after page 660.
And now for something completely different.
The modern internal combustion engine serves a primary focus, and that is to pump air. There are many different paths for that air to flow, each serving their own purpose, including compression, the EGR function, and many more. But first, let's start off with the EGR. If you think the EGR stands for everybody gets a ride, don't be foolish. The EGR adds inert exhaust gas to the air fuel charge. Because that charge doesn't contain as much energy, if you want more power, you're going to have to drive better. Boy howdy, that's as dandy as a bumper on a sweater. Modern technology at its finest. Take these two youngsters, for example, arguing over the difference between static and effective compression. Who in the world is going to teach them? Oh, it's Mr. Johnson. Going to tell them about how when the intake valve closes is the dividing factor, huh? Like on that car over there. The camshaft controls the movement of the valves, and in some points in the operation, both valves are open simultaneously, which is called valve overlap. The measurements of when these valves are opened is crucial, for it can both be the bee's knees of your classy chassis, or it can turn you into the dead hooper of the grandstand. If you want a new camshaft, danger! You might also need new intake and exhaust manifolds. And if you still think that's all you need, danger! You'll also need a better carburetor to supply more fuel. And if you think you're done yet, danger! You'll also need some better computer mapping to keep everything harmony in your automotive vehicle. For example, look at little Susie, daydreaming about a high overlap Summit racing cam and her new bored out big block bad boy behemoth. Sounds good. Snap out of it, Susie, and cross the street already. Goodness gracious, he said overlap doesn't matter. Don't trust people in traffic. Do the measurements yourself.